Okay. Hello and welcome to Flaggerdoot Chasing. I'm Scott and this is Chris. Hey, Chris.
Hey Scott, how's it going?
It's going good. All right. So today we're talking about, are you having trouble finishing key initiatives or projects? And do you need a project manager or should you consider something different?
Yeah, and I think one of the first things we should state right off the bat is a project manager means many different things to many different people.
Yep,
Everybody has their own experience with them, and we're going to delve into that a little bit over the next few minutes.
that sounds good. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if this works. All right. Can you see that?
I can, yep.
Okay, let's move some stuff out of the way here. So for waterfall, typical project management, success rates are pretty low. So this is some of the latest data, 57% challenged and 29% fail and 14% successful, pretty low.
Yep.
So I think we need to bring up some points here that um, planning is not doing. I think that's a pretty obvious thing from a project point of view.
Yeah, very
And
much so, yeah.
yeah,
Very.
and project management and waterfall project management typically they look at things or typically things that are variables as fixed. So time and scope are both fixed, and we both know that's just not usually feasible. And so ideally one of them is fixed and one of them is variable, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes.
And yeah, so, project managers will add contingency to acknowledge that fact, but that's just another variable.
And it seems that many executives, they love the idea of fixed time and scope. And because it makes them feel good, they have a good plan. And then, of course, there's execution, which, when you start to execute, that's when the wheels fall off. And
Exactly.
I guess one more thing too is that in a typical waterfall project, you're relying on people to convert data into reporting rather than taking it direct from a system. So that's one of those weaknesses in it. You can have what are called, watermelon projects that look green on the outside, but they're red on the inside.
Yeah, and oftentimes these are extremely subjective in terms of the reporting until, frankly, the rubber meets the road when the project's supposed to go live, and all of a sudden it turns from bright green to a throbbing red.
So there's Agile here. Agile success rates better, still not great, but they're definitely better. Any comments there, Chris?
Yeah, it, we talk a lot about why it's more successful because of the collaboration and how we try to look at things from an overview perspective. It's funny when I look at success rates, um, I equate it with the Hall of Fame. Like, let's say you're going into the Baseball Hall of Fame. 14% is batting 140. That's not going to get you into the Hall of Fame.
No.
42 is 420. Yeah, that's a pretty decent shot, but it's still, you don't have that certainty about success rates, even at 42%.
Yep. So I guess the question we're going to be asking today is there another way to do this? And the answer is yes. And how to approach what people call projects. But it is going to take a paradigm shift. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. Here is a process. It is, and we're going to use product as the example, and features that come into this product management life cycle, go to various places, touch various places, and then ultimately result in dollars. But is that a project? Is a feature a project? Is a new product a project? Or is it just a piece of work moving through a process? And that's an important differentiation.
Yeah, and one thing that always leaps to mind for me is if you start attacking a flow like this as a series of projects, going back to some of the fundamental definitions of what a project manager does, they've got a specific remit, they've got a specific scope, they've got a specific levels of authority. And what we're going to talk about is you got to increase your peripheral vision when you're working through an enterprise, because somebody's output is someone else's input, and you got to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I think, a system like this in place, it does a couple things. One is you can establish a consistent process of execution for important things like new features and new products. And then number two, which is not happening until the end of a project, end of a typical waterfall project, is you're continually optimizing this process to make the time it takes to get done shorter. And that's a pretty big differentiator. And in that optimization, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. In that optimization, I want to make sure we understand what that means. And that is when Chris and I are talking about optimization, it's the um, visualization of the work. It's the identification of the bottlenecks in that process. And then three, working on that bottleneck until it's no longer a bottleneck, and then repeat and repeat and repeat.
Well, exactly, because when you're looking at an organic system, you're always going to have a weak link. It's just almost by definition.
Yeah.
You have to visualize that process, identify what that constraint is, that blocker is that you talked about, resolve it, surface it, elevate it, and then continue to iterate that process on the next thing that you find.
Yeah, and the environment's always changing too. So that's a good process to deal with environmental changes.
Exactly.
So what does this process deliver? I'm going to walk down the list here. It delivers work and organizational transparency. It delivers an on-demand status of work, so you know where the work is in the process at any one time. It has a much earlier identification of critical issues, which is really important um, to avoid that watermelon effect. Um, it also changes things in that when you talk about agile and you talk about scaling, so we talked about this in the last video. When you talk about teams and scaling, this is a little bit different in that on that drawing, if you remember, there's marketing, there's go-to-market, there's all these pieces, but all these teams must collaborate to get this work out the door. And so you're really working on um, optimizing that flow with those other teams and collaborating with them. Um,
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in a subsequent video, but I want to take you back a little bit to that comment you made about visualization. One of the real benefits of the approach that we employ is that the work actually becomes the data.
yeah,
And that's hugely significant. So it removes that subjectivity that you might have in a traditional project where, how we doing, Scott? Oh, we're kind of green. Okay, we'll go with green. This is actually data driven, and that visualization that we're talking about isn't confined to one or two people. It's confined to the entire organization so that they can start to adjust their perceptions of how things are going.
yeah, I think that's critical too. It's not people-based, it's data-based on the movement of work across your system. And that's a big difference. That's how you uncover the issues early. I would say this style too is you're really building an organization that's continually improving because of that process we talked about, and it's adapting to those emerging threats. And also what it's creating is this cultural alignment. So everybody's focused on getting this through that pipeline. And I will say one thing, again, we're going to talk about this next week, but it eliminates that red cape style, that hero style of work where, the superstar jumps into the last minute, saves the project because it went from green to red, and you need someone to jump in and be a hero.
Yeah, no, I've seen that red cape syndrome a number of times. I've managed people where, in fact, it's immensely gratifying to the superhero that does it. But what happens everybody else in the team, if it happens often enough, it becomes predictable that they start sitting back and leaning back in their chairs.
Yeah, and we're going
And
to cover all the other effects that it has on an organization, and it's pretty significant. So, I guess in conclusion here, before you hire a project manager for a major initiative or corrective action, ask yourself, should I be setting up a system and a process that I can continually optimize and that I can move my work through, or also use for many projects or many similar style of projects? If so, then maybe hiring that project manager isn't really the best course of action. Makes sense, Chris?
I think so, yeah. And it's not that there's never a need for that kind of specific expertise, but it also suggests to us that you don't need that specific style and expertise every single time, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of dynamics in today's business world.
So if you're an executive and you're facing this decision for your company, and you'd like to learn more, feel free to schedule a 30-minute guidance session with Chris and I. And we'll go ahead and put the link in the video on YouTube so you'll be able to find it there. So until then, thanks for joining us. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Dun, 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 dun.